Welcome to In Depth, your weekly podcast from Press Express about news and newsmakers from India, Bangladesh, and beyond. We bring you an in depth look at the top stories that are making headlines. I'm Tulika, your host from Delhi. We're discussing a sensitive topic today. More than 20 days have passed since the Israel Hamas war began. The whole world is sharply divided, with many countries and governments supporting either the Israeli or the Palestinian side. But the real victims, the people, continue to suffer. It is estimated that more than 8,000 people have lost their lives so far in this war, and many more are injured. Is there any solution in sight? And in terms of geopolitics, how is this war going to change the future of the world? To talk more about this, I have two amazing guests with me joining me from Dhaka and Doha, Qatar. First up, I'd like to introduce Professor Imtiaz Ahmed. He's an expert in international relations and he's a former director at the Center for Genocide Studies at the University of Dhaka. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'd also like to introduce my second guest. He's Khalid Al Frouk. He's joining us from Doha, Qatar. He's a Palestinian academic and an author of two books on Hamas. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, both of you, for joining us. And I'll start with you, Khalid, by asking you this. You were born in Bethlehem in the West Bank. You grew up in a refugee camp. Can you tell us about your initial years?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, Tulika, maybe just a passing note. I have some issues with naming this war because all over the place we have it like Israel-Hamas war. This is Israel-Palestine war. It is not only between Israel and Hamas. The entire Palestinian people, in fact, under attack nowadays. So now, going to your question, well, it has been a dramatic change for my family. My grandparents first, and then my parents, to be uprooted from our village near Bethlehem, exactly on the border of what would become the Israeli 1948 line, and then removed and pushed to Bethlehem itself, the city, where an ad hoc refugee camp was constructed, and then they started living under tents, and I was born there in later on, of course, not in 1948. But anyway, what I remember, of course, is the sheer loss that I could see in the eyes, talk in the broken souls of my grandparents and my parents,
Yes.
up until their death. That sheer loss remained with them, manifest maybe every single day. The land of my grandfather was on that land. There was an Israeli town built exactly on the border.
Oh,
Later on, after 1967, when the entire Bethlehem and the entire West Bank was occupied by Israel, so the entirety of Palestine now under the occupation, under the Israel occupation. After that year, 1967, another Israeli settlement now in the West Bank was created or constructed on the other side of the village. So the village since then is sandwiched between Israeli town and Israeli settlement on the land of the village. So I grew up with this kind of bitterness in not only within my small family, but even the larger family.
the
And
larger community. Yes, I understand completely. Sheer loss, broken souls, and bitterness is how a lot of people have spent their lives. And I completely take your point about calling this an Israel-Palestine war because the story goes way beyond. There is a history that a lot of people around the world don't really understand or only understand one aspect of it. But coming to now, what is the kind of personal loss or personal experience that you are facing?
yes, as from the second day of this war on the 8th of October, I had the bad news of one of my close friends in Gaza killed, and then
So
even
sorry to
before.
hear that.
Thank you. And even before absorbing, the shock, two days after that, another friend was killed with his wife in this case. So his wife, and four kids. The eldest was, I think, 13 years old, wiped off now from the civil registrar along with, until this very moment, more than 80 Palestinian families. So on the one hand, as an observer, as an academic, as somebody who writes about, Palestine and
Mm,
what's happening for many, many years, I need to have a distance. I need to have a sober, let's say, analysis and all of
mm,
that. Yet at the same time, the personal loss keeps even coming up, because not only these two friends. Yesterday, I had some bad news of a third friend, and then six more. They lost their families or part of their families. They're still there. One of them at the
God.
hospital. So it's very hard to handle the personal loss, and when you talk to them, when you speak to them on the phone or messages, so it hits you really badly. And at the same
Mm,
time, you try to have some bigger picture, and have some understanding, analysis, and
mm.
uh, cold-blooded, let's say, academic perspective. It is very hard, in fact, to disentangle your emotions and your reviews.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, when you say you're my emotions, and emotions of what? These are human beings. And until now,
Yes.
I think the death toll is inching to 8,000 people in the Gaza Strip. People die every hour as we speak. Not only
Mm,
dying, but I think it's a genocidal campaign. And this is an academic. This is not driven by emotions. And we have our expert on next to
mm,
me, our guest. We will hear from him. But I think this is a genocidal act when
mm,
you cage 2.3 million people, most of them, not more, most of them children and women, and then
mm.
you cut off water, electricity, food, medical supply, and say it on the record, we will starve you to death, and then
Yes.
bombard them for 20
Carpet
days.
bombing going on there, and you
This
mentioned
is
caged.
genocide. I think this is genocide.
Sorry to cut in. You mentioned caging people, and I want to come to you for that. You've said earlier that Hamas did not really plan out this attack in detail. It stemmed more from the need to do something to break this Israeli blockade. Palestinians have literally been caged in Gaza since 2007, and Israel hasn't really fulfilled the promises it made to Palestinians early on. How do you analyze the situation about Hamas not really planning out the attack? And how is this going to expand going further?
Yeah. First of all, 2 points. One is the larger context that you have already mentioned. That it started, at least the shorter context, started in
Mm,
2007 with the blockade on Gaza. So you have the people, the Palestinians in Gaza, blockaded, under siege, air, land, and sea, and every single thing, every single item, every single person that who want to go to Gaza or come out of Gaza should go through very harsh security measures. So
mm,
since then, the people are suffocated, and in every single index that is considered by the UN as a measure
mm.
of living conditions, uh,
Yes,
water supply, health service, education, free movement, sanitation, every employment, every one of
employment.
these, you have now the people in the Gaza Strip are hitting the highest in the whole world. Unemployment is 60%.
Yes.
Sanitation is the worst, and all of that. Anyway,
Water,
so this,
water, I heard 78% of water is not fit for consumption.
exactly, the water is not fit for human consumption. So the people, Hamas, the resistance, the ordinary Palestinians in the street, they got
Mm.
fed up, frustrated out of this. We need to scream out so that the whole world listen to us, and
Yes.
and come and see what is happening with,
And this was
with
an
this.
attempt to scream out this
This
attack,
was an attempt
so called attack from
of
Hamas.
yeah, a big scream out to the whole world to know what is happening in this cage, in this the largest open air prison on the world.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Very strong, emotive comments from you, sir. I'll come to you now, Professor Emmett. And I want to ask you, do you consider this a genocide, and why or why not?
Thank you, Tulika. Well, yes, this is definitely a genocide. This is a genocide live, if you can say, because most of the genocide that happened, the global community did not see live. But because of the
Mm,
technology, this time it is a genocide live. And there's no reason it's genocide because
mm,
the definition, internationally accepted, globally recognized definition of genocide is intent to destroy in whole or in part,
mm,
and in four categories, national, ethnic, racial, and religious. And so the statements coming from high officials in Israel and some high officials in the United States, including President, some of the U.S. presidents, some of the
mm,
statements amounts absolutely genocidal. And I'm sure today or tomorrow, some of these policymakers have to be brought into trial or will be brought into trial.
mm.
Already, international human rights activists have come forward and even have
Yes.
warned. They have warned the U.S. President, Biden, that he would be also, probably, also charged because in the definition of genocide, complicity
Mm,
is also part of genocide. So there's no reason not to say that this is a genocide, given from our experience back in 1971, which was
mm.
equally genocide. But as I said, in 71 genocide, because we did not have this much technology, the world did not see,
Yes.
live. But this
And I
time,
have to say, I have to come in and say that that 1971 genocide in Bangladesh is still not officially recognized.
absolutely, it's and again there was a complicity of the United States officials, particularly Nixon and Kissinger. Even when their officials in Dhaka, particularly Mr. Archer Blood, with all his telegrams at that particular time, pointing
Mm,
out that a genocidal intent is going on, and selective genocide is going on in Bangladesh, they kept a blind eye. And so, again, the complicity of high officials, particularly of Nixon and Kissinger,
mm.
was there. So, and you don't see them changing. That's the interesting part with all the talking about rules and regulations and international law, rule-based world
Mm.
system. It now looks that all are, just getting absolutely abolished and getting to a point where I don't know how Western countries would recover this, because now, as I
Mm.
say, globally they are seeing, they don't have to read it, they can easily see some of the you know some of the things that the Western countries are doing. And so
Yes.
whatever they were saying in last 30 to 40 years or 50 years is literally crumbling down. So I think, but I hope, I have hope on the
Mm.
people of the West. On the they have come out in a much large number than before.
Mm.
I literally have hope even on the people of Israel. I think the Jews have come out in a much bigger way than before in the United States and in different parts of Europe. So I
Yes.
still have hope that people will, fix this particular issue. But I'm afraid the policymakers who are in charge
Mm.
are absolutely, doing things
Yes.
which is really making the whole Western civilization crumble down.
And I want to bring to you what recently happened at the United Nations. Secretary General Antonio Guterres earlier this week on Tuesday gave out a statement in which he condemned, and he also said, and I want to quote from what he said. Uh, he said that the Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. But now he's been asked to retract his statement, to apologize, and to even resign. How do you analyze the situation?
Yeah, well, that's the sad part of Western countries. Whenever they get exposed, since they still think that they are living in a unipolar world. But I'm afraid the world is not the same. We
Mm,
are not living in the 40s or 50s or 60s. This is 21st century. The world has changed remarkably. Look at Middle East. It has
mm,
changed remarkably. look at some of the countries, that have come up. I always say it's a re-rise, in a re-rise of China, of India, Brazil, Turkey, some
Hmm.
of these countries.
The
Uh,
global south.
is actually re-rise, because back in the 18th century, China was the largest economy in the world. Undivided
Hmm.
India was the second largest in 18th century. They lost out in 19th and 20th. So in this century, series of countries have come up, and this is largely because of decolonization. We forget that the whole Western civilization, the foundation of Western civilization, is on colonialism and slavery. I think that part of history people have forgotten. But now
Hmm.
with these countries coming up, so we are not we're not even 20 years back. Things were different. But look at the some of the transformation in the Middle East. Look at the
Hmm.
kind of relationship with Saudi Arabia and Iran, for example. That
Yes.
itself shows that things are changing. So I believe it is very unfortunate that the governments who are now in power in Europe and in the United States, or even Canada, are not keeping the kind of vision that they talk about.
Hmm.
They're literally exposed about the double standard. But unless they rectify very quickly, I'm afraid, as I say, the whole idea of the West of trying to create a rule-based international law, no one will take them seriously, and
Hmm.
and that's, I think, is a really one of the big problems that they need to resolve. But I don't know how they are going to resolve that.
Do you see a change in the shape of Middle East as we know it? And how do you see this conflict expanding?
Well, I think the only way they can stop its funding is first, of course, the ceasefire has to come in a big way, and then they need to sit down and go back to the Oslo Agreement.
Coming to you, Khalid, do you expect right now, from what is happening, do you expect to see a ceasefire anytime soon?
From my, again, humble perspective, I think there is no preset plan on either of these parties. This
Okay.
is why it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because any unplanned step could lead to regional explosion.
Let's talk about Qatar also. Qatar has agreed to review its ties with Hamas. Do you see any kind of deportation of Hamas leaders or any other similar measures happening?
Number one, we need to double check, the source of the information. I heard this last night. I think I can't remember where I read it or. So we need to double check, the authenticity and what is the Qatari view of this, the other side of the story. Number two, my take on this is to doubt that any radical step would be taken from the Qatari state.
My final question to both of you is, do you see any scope for peace in the near term?
Well, unfortunately, at the moment, I think the picture is gloomy and bleak, and the main reason behind this is the deepening of the colonization of Palestine and
Hmm.
the total rejection of even the two-state solution idea that comes from Israel.
Hmm.
As Imtiaz has said, this has been agreed upon in 1993. 1993 with Oslo Accords, the Palestinians
Yes.
more or less were hoping that by 1999, that was 5 years after signing these
Hmm.
accords, they will have independent and sovereign Palestinian state. Now, until this very moment, we are in 2023, we have 30 years of basically deception. In 30 years, the Palestinians, they are hitting just a wall, a
Hmm.
deadlock. The expansion of the settlements, even in those bank, East Jerusalem, and in every single area in those bank, it's like, as they say, Swiss cheese. There is no continuity between the West Bank
Hmm.
areas, let alone the disconnection between the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So the premise of the territorial space of
Hmm.
this state, the promised state, is finished off. In fact,
I want to ask you directly, would Palestine now settle for a two-state solution if there is no other option left?
the humane, universal formula is one state solution. It is not two-state solution. And this comes in the future when people, maybe you will have another generation, maybe one, or in the future, you have some people more into this idea.
Well, on that note, I'd like to wrap up this discussion. Both my guests feel that there are no clear cut solutions in the near term. The future is bleak, and on this sober note, we'll be ending today's discussion. But there is always hope, and we hope that in the long run or in the midterm, we do end up with a solution in sight. Thank you to both my guests for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Tuli.
Thank you. And for our listeners, I hope you're going back with a more in depth understanding of the Israel Palestine conflict. Please feel free to share your thoughts with me on my email, tulika.bhatnagar@pressexpress.org, or do feel free to DM me on Facebook or X. Till we meet next time, it's Namaste from Tulika.